Malaysia, you could see clearly Malaysia economic development was stuck, so they find where the priority was, and they had that rising deficit issues, and then they were concerned about sustainability, a bit like us, and they bring priority projects to deal with these issues specifically, and make sure that each of these priority projects will deliver so that Malaysia becomes the high income economy in selected priority sectors. Then also to make sure that the gross national income, the commitment of private sector to be able to invest and create jobs. So these are what come out from what we said. Next slide. So my question to the panelists in that case is, so we need first to find out where are our issues. What burning issue we have in the region to trade, tourism, and air transport sector. We selected 3 sectors. And so you have seen this case here. And now we'll start maybe by Prosper, since you are not air transport, but aviation, civil aviation, broader. Can you tell us?
It works. Thank you very much, Gausu. I can see after some time you haven't lost the enthusiasm for the lab since we were together in this first trial that was very successful in Africa, whereby we managed to create 30 plus user-preferred air navigation routes with a huge amount of benefits in terms of distance, flight distance, in terms of fuel savings, in terms of reduction of CO2 emissions. I think in that line, we need, as a priority, to look into optimizing flight paths, flight operations. We are in a region where, after 37, 38 years now of career, we had 20 minutes longitudinal separation in the African airspace. Then we came to 15 minutes. Now we have 10 minutes longitudinal separation, which is not enough. I mentioned that to say that we have been able to make some enhancements, improvement to the air traffic management systems and the route systems in line with the efficiencies we are looking into when it comes to flight operations. In September 2008, we managed to implement RVSM, and we were the last region to implement, but we have been able to do it because we structured ourselves. We didn't yet know about the concept of lab, but it was a sort of lab. Airlines accepted to pre-fund the investment that were required to make all the safety analysis until implementation and even post-implementation safety case. We were successful. I'm saying that because I believe that if we have done it once, we can still do it. That's why I think we have, as Idris said, we have the brains, we have the knowledge, we have the experience. When I say we, all of us together, I'm not sure there's an area of aviation, even beyond aviation, that is missing in this room. I'm not saying we'll be here for 8 weeks, but I'm talking of the concept, and I'm saying what we want to propose, it has to do with, we can do it, it has to do with the connectivity we discussed earlier today. Connectivity in terms of ICAO is about moving passengers, moving cargo with shorter trips, with optimal user satisfaction, and at the least cost. So if we implement, I will go straight forward because I'm thinking of free routing airspace, which has been successfully implemented in Europe, in other areas. In doing so, I forgot to mention the Atlantic Ocean random routing area, where we have already in the ocean already implemented random routing, meaning instead of classic fixed route network based on ground-based facilities, we are allowing entry-exit point where airlines can conduct flight operations, I would say, freely, depending on what suits the type of aircraft, the weather, the conditions that are prevailing. So today we talked about the impact of the crisis, that's the current crisis. And fuel came out of the many concerns that we have. Prices have soared. We don't have control over that. So we know, I think I heard 30% or so of the cost of operation of an airline. So I think it's an area that deserves priority amongst some other solutions. I don't want to be too long on that. I mentioned Europe that I've gone through. For the last readings that I have about implementation of free routing airspace in Europe, it was like the projection, like 1 billion nautical miles saved with 60 million of ton, 25 million CO2 emission reduction saved. So we don't have the figures yet, and I think if the project is endorsed, we should work along this way now to see how we can quantify the benefits in our area. It may be complex, but we know we have terminal areas, but we also have remote continental airspace that are conducive to such implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Prosper. So I will ask the same question as I'm going around there. So to your neighbor first. Ali, what is really for you the burning issue we need to address?
Yeah. Thank you, Gelson. In fact, the concept of the lab is very good. It works for Indonesia, for Malaysia, and it can work in a lot of other countries. But in Africa, let us be honest with some historical fact. In Africa, in fact, there is no harmonized vision or unity among many states across Africa, with each state having its own priorities and challenges in terms of domestic and political issue to deal with. Also, some states are involved in geopolitical tension with each other. We have some example in Africa. With those inherent and long outstanding challenges, the impression is that the concerned focus and action on regional and continental cooperation and collaboration are not high in the agenda of the different African states, except a few of them. So, on the other hand, most of, or if not all, the institution and organization responsible for trade, tourism, and air transport in the different states in Africa are controlled by the governments. Thus, we see that most of the strategic decisions need to have the endorsement and blessing of the government, which therefore render the voice of institution most of the time ineffective or simply endless. Also in Africa, governments are involved in the whole aviation ecosystem, ownership and or management. This can mean that the airport, airlines, air navigation, tourism and other institutions have common ownership or management. But if the coordination to attain the whole objective of the ecosystem it's not achieved, this can suffer the management. So it's in fact, sometimes all this management didn't look for the same vision and which this suffer the objective. For example, air transport charges in Africa are still largely determined by government, with most airports requiring government approval to any change in charges. So hence, in the objective of the lab to reduce the cost of travel in Africa, and here the lab must not only consider the airport charges and taxes, but also the cost of operation of airlines and air traffic management and other. So it will be important to ensure that civil aviation, airport, and other representatives are adequately mandated by their respective government to participate in the lab and to take decisions. So the appeal which I am making in the African context is the lab to adopt a top-down and bottom-to-up approach in parallel, meaning that through the African Union, for example, all heads of states must be briefed on the importance of the lab and requested to send adequately mandated and empowered representatives in the lab. This thus leads to more meaningful action which can be adopted in all confidence. So for me, the lab is good tools for us, but it should be adapted to the African concept.
Thank you, Ali. Now let me go to gain more. Moneyman, what do you think should be,
well,
what do you feel like burning issue?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And by the way, money is not in the bag, it's now electronic, so don't follow the bag. So I think when I saw the topic, Beyond the Crisis, it's something that resonates very well with the bank. The African Export-Import Bank, for some of you who may not be aware, when we were established, we actually call ourselves a child of necessity, not the term I've seen it being used by some of my fellow colleagues, men who have got children all over, but that's not the child of necessity I'm talking about. Afreximbank was born as a result of the crisis we had in the 80s. The ministers of finance actually sat down and said all the financial institutions were leaving the continent. It was a commodity crisis. The situation was bad. We couldn't even provide trade finance. And based on that, they actually said they needed to create a Pan-African multilateral financial institution that will deal with African problems using African solutions. So when I basically started looking at the issues relating to trade, tourism, and transportation, the bank has actually experienced in dealing with the crisis. The pandemic, we actually provided more than 7 billion to deal with the pandemic. And now the Ukraine crisis, we are also providing more than 4 billion to, so dealing with the crisis is basically our DNA. And when we started looking at intra-African trade, we all know that intra-African trade is very low, 16 to 18%. And we more or less adopted an approach similar to the lab. We are not calling it the lab, but we had to go granular to say, why is intra-African trade so low? Why is it that in Europe is high, in Asia is high? What is it that we are doing wrong? So we actually listed a whole host of challenges, and one of the reasons that came from our analysis may even surprise you. Some of you, yes, say infrastructure is a problem. We agree it's a problem, it needs to be addressed. But why is it that the same infrastructure that we have is carrying a lot of trade with third parties? Almost more than 80% of trade is being carried with the same infrastructure. Why is the same infrastructure not carrying a lot of intra-African trade? There must be another problem. And the answer boiled down to lack of access to trade and market information. Somebody sitting in Cairo did not know that in South Africa there was a market for citrus oranges. But when you then provide access to trade and market information, you will be able to connect. When you create the demand, the infrastructure will follow. There is nobody who will build the infrastructure without seeing the demand. And when you go to any financial institution, they'll ask you for a business plan, feasibility studies. Where is the demand? Where are you going to get the returns from? So we know that intra-African trade is affected by a whole host of issues. One of them is the payment and settlement issues. And we put in place a Pan-African payment and settlement platform to facilitate payments in local currencies. That's how we are addressing the issues of payment to facilitate trade. Because if you increase intra-African trade, you will be able to have more flights actually following. We saw it even in the case of China. When China increased the trade with everybody, the aviation sector also expanded. Coming on to the aviation sector itself, the key problems that we actually see relates to, probably, I'll just highlight 3 key focus areas. In the continent, we've been talking about the Yamoussoukro Declaration, SATAM, and all these things that we have. But as my colleague highlighted, there is no common vision or common policy that will pull all these together and consolidate them and actually show the government, the airline carriers, all the stakeholders that this is a common project, everybody will have a benefit. So without that common vision, common continental policy endorsed by heads of states at the highest level, we will not be able to move together as a continent to resolve the challenges in the aviation sector. And this is something that we really need to look at carefully. The second issue is, of course, affordability of finance. Where can you get the money to buy the aircrafts? Or where can you lease the aircrafts? Where can you get the money to put in place the infrastructure? These are the challenges that we've been looking at, even to put in place navigation equipment and systems. These issues, they cost money. The bank has actually been looking at most of these things. And some of you are in the room, the airlines, there are some of you are beneficiaries of our financing that we have already provided. We've provided billions to finance the industry. But we know that the cost of financing is still high compared to Europe and other countries. So we are now looking at probably finding innovative ways of reducing the cost of financing and probably considering the leasing as an alternative to actually facilitate those who want to participate in the sector. Lastly, Chairman, tourism is also very important, because if you really do not facilitate intra-African travel, it will be very difficult for us to be able to boost or support the tourism. We've had all the challenges affecting the sector, but for AFRAA Bank, we are also providing a lot of support in terms of construction of tourism facilities, and we've actually come up with a product that we call construction and tourism facilities to facilitate the expansion of the tourism sector, because we believe that it is very important to promoting the aviation sector. Thank you very much.
Okay. That's the right way. So I don't want to be accused, but we never respect ladies first. And now we want to have, like in Africa, lady last. So it will not happen. Go away.
I was sure we were going to go the African way. Ladies first, but men just before. So thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Now I understand why my colleague Gainmore wanted me to come before him. He did mention, and then I guess Mr. Moderator did not hear him, because he wanted me first to talk about the intra-African trade before the money. So, but since, as he has said, once you have intra-African trade, the money will follow. Or hopefully the money can come first. I'm not sure which one comes first. But for us at the African Continental Free Trade Area, one of the key things our Secretary General, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, is always pushing for is actually what Gainmore has just said. Africans dealing with their own solutions for the problems that they have. And we are able to do it. It's just that sometimes I think it's just the willpower that is missing. And so for us, actually, the lab also provides space for the willpower to be able to actually then move forward and look for solutions to the problems that we are facing in Africa. And one of the key elements, and maybe just to speak a little bit about the intra-African trade, the continental free trade area, is that we have been set up by heads of state and government of the African Union, so we are an organ of the African Union. And our key mandate is actually to improve intra-African trade. So we come up with the agreements, and under the agreements we have different protocols that are dealing with different issues. One of the issues is trade in goods, we have trade in services, we have, and that those two actually have already been concluded. We only have a few issues to finalize those two protocols. And we have what we call phase 2 protocols, which are dealing with investment, intellectual property, digital trade, competition policy, and which one is the last one? Because there are 5, and women and youth in trade. So we are also dealing with the issue of inclusion to ensure that we bring on board SMEs, women, and youth. So that, in a nutshell, is the agreement under the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, 2 of the issues, or even basically 3 of the issues we're dealing with here, are considered under what we call trading services. So air transport actually falls under the transport sector in general, and then we have tourism that is also a different sector. And then we also have a sector where we talk about recreational and generally the creative industry sector. So those are key issues that are related to the air trade in services per se, and the work that we are undertaking to ensure that we have the enhancement of liberalization of trade in services in the continent. And I believe your question is really, the region in this case means the continent of Africa. So we have undertaken a lot of work in terms of liberalizing trade in services in general. And one of the key elements about the AFCFTA is that we do have the political willpower of our governments, and it has become the first African Union agreement to enter into force and even to actually start a form of implementation already by the different member states. And right now we have 43. So we actually have more than SATAM in terms of a commitment of AU member states to the implementation of the AFCFTA that was signed here in East Africa, in Kigali, in March of 2018. So you can see it's only a few years earlier, and like the CEO of KQ said, we also started with COVID. The Secretariat was started in 2019, but it became effective in 2020, just as the COVID pandemic was starting. So we are also a COVID affected institution. But we have still kept up with it. I'm sure we are among the few who kept airlines alive, because we were still trying as much as possible to follow all COVID protocols, but at the same time ensure we have hybrid meetings whereby we are able to still have our member states meet and speak to one another to be able to finalize the negotiations and to implement. Now, moving on then to say, how then are we going to deal with this issue? And we have spoken a lot about it in different forums. And the issue for us is, how do we ensure that the private sector and governments actually speak one voice? We were speaking earlier with Captain Kibe, and we were saying, look at what has worked in the East African community, especially in terms of the communication sector, where we have been able to have common harmonized roaming charges in terms of the telecommunication sector. How do we ensure that we have similar experiences even as we speak air transport? How do we reduce the fees and charges that are prevalent in the air transport sector? And so those are, for me, those are some of the burning areas that we can now look at and see how. I don't like using harmonization too much, because governments don't also like to completely harmonize, but at least reduce and have common criteria in terms of setting the fees and charges that we have in the different areas. Because for us, that is one of the key elements we call a barrier to trade. Even though it's domestic related issues, and all governments still have the right to regulate, but they also have room to ensure that the regulations that they set up do not hinder trade that we are all trying to enhance. The other element is the relationship between air transport and tourism. If we are able to enhance air transport, or make it better and easier, and the interconnectivity that we need to be able to do that, then tourism will follow. Because once you have the goods going and people following their goods, then they're able to say, okay, maybe then I can also tour that country and see what that country has to offer. So the more we improve in terms of trade and connectivity in Africa, the better it shall be for all of us. And it was actually music to my ears to actually hear the CEO of KQ talking about enhancing cargo, because without that cargo transport part, we shall not be able to then move our goods from one area to one country to another. And maybe as I finish, Mr. Moderator, to just mention that under the AFCFTA, with also our colleagues from the AFRAA Bank, we have identified a number of value chains that we are working on, and 4 of them are a priority right now, and that's one in the pharmaceutical, in the automobile, and transport and logistics. So those are 3. The 4th one is pharmaceuticals, transport and logistics, and automobiles. Yeah, so there are actually 3. So you can see already in the air transport sector, which is covered under transport, it's already one of the key areas that we have identified to have as an enabler to all the other value chains that we have. Actually, the 4th one is agro-processing, and the focus is on fish and meat. And with fish and meat, you have to have quick transport related to that, and so air transport becomes one of our key areas to cover. So just as a snapshot of what the AFCFTA is doing and some of the areas that are related to the work that you're talking about here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. So, Captain, so you are, make it fly.
Jumbo, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. I speak last because we lead from the back. So it has been an interesting start, and all our panelists have given a wide view concerning this question that Gausu has asked. With regard to what are the burning issues in the region that relate to trade, tourism, and air transport sectors. So I don't really think I'll have that much more to add at this point from what has already been said. The key burning issues have already been captured. So for me, because we have these burning issues, the question I ask is, so how are we going to resolve it? How do we resolve the issue? So, in my view, air transport really is, air transport, trade, and tourism don't talk to each other. I think have you discovered a short form for Africa Continental Free Trade Area? Oh, okay. It's not like not like SATAM, because I've tried to say anyway. Yeah, that one. Africa Continental Free Trade Area, dealing with trade. Then you have AFCAC, which also deals with air transport. We have tourism sectors, but it's not often that we see them working together. So I think the idea of the lab by AFRAA is to get people together. We lock them up in one room, like our man from Malaysia is saying, let us come up with our problem. In this case, for me, it's obvious. Trade, tourism, and air transport sectors need to sit together. And when we do that, we identify what are the issues. Air transport is the single largest enabler of economic development anywhere. So why aren't you talking to us as Africa Continental Free Trade Area? Afrexim Bank, we do talk, but we find that you have not really captured the true message of how air transport can be a huge enabler for economic development in Africa. And the way we're going to develop in Africa is through Pan-African trade. I've come up with a concept that I'm calling Pan-African Travel for Tourism and Trade. So we need to come up in this lab with how we can connect the three: trade, tourism, and travel. Because of the land mass that we have in Africa, we've been told we're the second largest land mass in the world. We have 1.3 billion Africans, plus a few 100 million other people who live in Africa. It's a huge market, and the only way to travel efficiently and quickly is through air transport. But yet our connectivity is extremely poor. Why is it poor? So we need to sit down in this lab, discuss, and come up with proposed solutions of how we can work together. So I think to start, this is what I would say: we need to connect ourselves, we need to connect the three, and then come up with solutions, and those solutions are possible, and we will come up with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. So you heard what they say. I will go quickly through our slide of the presentation. If you can show, okay. So you heard the Malaysian, and this is how we have also a journey over 4 decades. So during these 4 decades, our global market share remained less than 3%. And then, if you look at the 80s, African carriers were contributing to that low global share at 45%. Now, when you reach 2019, you realize that that came down to 2.5, and you saw it this morning. Maureen showed it clearly. We are less We are now 1.9%. And the contribution of African carriers is even lower. It came down to 20% and 80% for foreign carriers. Worse, the intra-African part of it. The third of the city pair connects through hub outside the continent. Ali indicated to me that for him to be here from Tunis, he went through Doha. That's the practical situation. So this is what we need to deal with. If I go to my Manta way, we have to clearly see that we have a big issue. This marginalization, how do we revamp it? Next slide. And obviously, the good thing is, I think, Kibe, you said it, Emily said it, the three sectors are linked: trade, air transport, and tourism. And if you look at intra-Africa part of it, I think the figure was mentioned by Genmore, about 16%. Air transport, similar figure. Tourists arriving from other African countries is only 5%. Now, the global share, you heard it, is very small for all three of them. So, what is the common thing for them, for all these services? Our prices are not affordable to the middle class African. They have a GDP which does not allow them to become intra-Africa tourists, to fly by air, and also, so this is a common thing, yeah? So then our strategy should be very simple. Why don't we focus, as for your raison d'etre as Exim Bank, on intra-Africa? Because if we become competitive on intra-Africa and avoid Tunis, Nairobi to go through Doha, we will be competitive for the rest of the world because they have higher GDP. Next slide. So this, on the right-hand side, this is showing you which my speakers have already covered. Clearly, if we are trading affordable, consumable product, the good Kerisho tea is nowhere to be seen in Abuja. They consume Lipton tea there, very poor quality. So if that now, Emily, I'm looking at you, if you can promote that trade, you will see flight not from Nairobi to Lagos, but from Kisumu to Abuja as a requirement. Similarly, if through SATAM we can also make the fare affordable, then we will easily attract these traders on board of our airplane, and also the cargo derived for trading on board as cargo again. So this is the second yellow line showing how we also can impact on that. And the last one, if the tourism hospitalities are affordable for middle class, again, they will need more coffee and dairy. Every morning, you all went to breakfast here. So that means they will be buying more, again, products from Africa. So it goes that way. That's where now, on the left-hand side of your slide, you can see we need to anchor on both SATAM and the free trade area. So if we anchor on this and we realize that these three sectors help each other, then we engage in that virtuous cycle. The three of them developing together, getting bigger market share, and then increasing the middle class who will be buying these services. So, next slide. So, therefore, all our priority projects in the lab must address that issue. So, we need to make sure that we make the three sectors, so air transport, tourism, and trade, competitive on intra-Africa market, lowering either the cost or lowering the prices. It has been mentioned also here. And then, there will be growing industries together, so which means the GDP of the middle class will be growing, and the size of this middle class will be also growing. So finally, we need to attract private sector to transform, because most of our products, namely, are commodities in London. London decide for the cotton, how much your cotton wool is being sold, the oil, what else, the cocoa, and it's go on. Why should it be transformed locally into consumable product, which can be bought by first Africans, so that they can be also export, the refined products export competitively and bring more to the continent. So, next slide. That allows me to ask my panelists here if they can come with one of the priority project which meet these criteria, which will have this impact. And the first one this time is the captain. Captain, can you tell us about one such project, please?
Thank you, Gausu.
And how it impacts. So it's two questions in one.
Okay. Right. One priority project, Gausu, is the implementation of SATAM.
Yeah.
Because air transport is the single largest enabler of economic development, it will be the same for Africa. So if we are able to implement SATAM, we will be able to grow the trade opportunities and the tourism opportunities. But why have we not done it? We have heard of, first of all, the African Union Commission has given us the solution for Africa's problems. Africa needs to trade with itself to succeed. It's not going to be the trade with other countries outside of Africa. That will assist in the growth and development of Africa. But the greatest development and growth of Africa, I believe, is through Pan-African trade, tourism, and travel. We are going to solve our own problems ourselves. So, but why is it we already have a solution? African Union Commission has created the Single Africa Air Transport Market, launched in January of 2015, after the Yamoussoukro decision of 1988, which was 34 years ago. The declaration in 1988, 34 years ago. Then 24 years ago, the Yamoussoukro decision. And then in 2015, the birth of SATAM. In 2022, 35 states have signed for SATAM, 20 for solemn implementation, and only 8 in some way implementing SATAM. So why is this? If SATAM is so good, why isn't it hugely popular and successful? Look at the creation of Africa Continental Free Trade Area from 2018, began operations in 2020. We're in 2022. Have you seen vibrant growth of trade among Africans? Not yet. The question to ask is, why is it that there's no traction in these African Union solutions for Africa problem? I think it's because not many of us understand the benefit of SATAM or the Continental Free Trade Area. What is in it for me? What is in it for you? How does it affect you? So we need to come up with practical examples of how the implementation of SATAM will be of benefit to you as an individual. So I think the way that SATAM will be implemented is through a regional economic community block basis. We're 55 African countries. We cannot implement SATAM, all 55 of us, at the same time, in the same rate. It's not going to be possible. So we have to bring implementation down to a bite-size format. Bite-size for Africa is regional economic communities. In this region, we now have the East African community. We have now 7 partner states. We started off as 3, then we became 5, now we are 7, including DRC. So, if we decided today that the EAC is going to implement SATAM in full from day 1, we would have to make EAC, or the East African Community, domestic. Henry Ogoy from Kenya Airports was asking about the domestic in terms of Kenya, and Alan Kilavuka said that our domestic, really we should look at it on a regional basis like the EAC. So if we decided to make EAC domestic, what does that mean for you and me? It means, number 1, our air passenger service charge will drop from $50 per ticket to $5 per ticket. That's a 90% drop. And if, as government, because some of us are in government and we do introduce charges, if we decided that for the EAC, all the charges, fees, and taxes for air transport will be reduced by 90%, then we're looking at, currently, a ticket to Entebbe in Uganda, my neighbor here, a flight of 50 minutes is $400 US. What if we made that ticket $100? What impact will that have on you as an individual? You will say, I've heard of these Ugandans next door. I've never been there. So I want to go and visit. I can afford a $100 ticket. In fact, for me, I'll go with my wife. So that's $200. And we're going to do a weekend there. It will cost us maybe $100 for a weekend. We go on a Friday and come back on a Sunday. So $100 for accommodation. Then we have our meals and all this sort of thing. With $400, which is one ticket today, I can go with my wife for a full weekend to Entebbe and Kampala. And once we're there, we'll buy some things. My wife will find something interesting to buy. I may also find something interesting to buy, and we bring it home. So what have we done? With that $400, 2 people have been able to go away for a weekend. To go away for a weekend, what have you done? You have introduced tourism. You're staying in a hotel, that's part of tourism. But how are you getting there? It's air transport, that's travel. And then we find some things that are interesting that my wife would want to come and sell at home. So you buy those items there, and you bring them home and then you sell them. What have you done? You have done trade. So you've introduced trade, tourism, through air transport, travel. So once we discover that if we go domestic, it makes sense, and EAC is now fully operational as a domestic destination, then let's go down to our southern neighbors, SADC. If they have also gone domestic, we can have an agreement between the EAC and SADC how both regions can become domestic to each other. And when I say domestic for the carriers of those states, not foreigners, not foreign carriers, the actual carriers of those states. So when we finish with SADC, then we can go across to ECOWAS. Now I'll finally be able to go and visit Funke in Lagos, paying $200 instead of $600 or $800 on economy. Business class is like nearly $3,000. I'd rather go to Europe or somewhere else on business class than pay that kind of money to go to Lagos. But if I can go to Lagos for $200 or $150, I'll do the same thing that I did to Entebbe. I'll go come and visit you. We'll say that we'll see. We'll hear of Nigerians. Nigerians are mysterious people. They say that Nigerians are crooks, but they're not crooks. It's only that there are many people. There are more than 100 Nigerians. So if you have 1% who are crooks, you're looking at maybe 100,000. But and here maybe I have 10,000 in this country. But there are 100,000. Looks big, but look at the numbers. So the percentage of bad people is so small. It is 99% plus of the people are good, right? So I want to go and visit Nigeria. Who are these guys? Where do they live? So I'll go and visit Lagos. What do they eat? I'll go to a restaurant. I'll meet Funke, and I get to meet her friends, and then we all become friends, and so we enjoy. So for the $600, we can go, two of us. We can go and stay in an expensive hotel if we want. We can go and now start shopping for things from Nigeria. And we'll bring Nollywood movies with us because everybody loves the Nollywood movies. So but we've created another avenue for tourism and trade through travel in air transport. Then we go to the north. And we do the same. Eventually, all of Africa, SATAM will be implemented, where it will be domestic for all of us. Now, there will be direct flights to Tunis from Nairobi, and from Lagos, and from Joburg, and from wherever you name it. We'll be able to create non-stop flights or one-stop flights within Africa to any part of Africa, and forget about going outside of Africa. So I think this is what we need to sell. It's the benefit of implementation of SATAM and the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as the solution that is given by the African Union Commission. But to do that, we need to convince governments because they're the ones who are the main stumbling block. So if we can form a team. When we do our lab, when we sit all of us together, all the different sectors, and we come up with solutions, now we can go to the presidents of these countries and tell them, let us implement this thing that is an African solution for an African problem. Sorry, I hope I didn't overspeak.
No. Thank you, Captain. You can see that they are not sleeping at all. So this is one project. The idea is simple. We have domestic regime for tax and passenger services, which is very different from what happened on international flight. As he said, if you want to move from Nairobi to Arusha, Kilimanjaro, on that ticket, you will have $62 for Kenya, and $67 for Tanzania. Add these two. And Alex is watching, looking at me here. He have, as tourism airline, taking people to Kilimanjaro, he is charging only $50. But how many fold the charges of Kenya and Tanzania are compared to the 50? Now, if you go by what Captain mentioned, it will be at that level of domestic charges, which will bring your ticket for something like almost 200 for what, 40-minute flight, to something like just around his $50. 60, let's say $60. So that is what that small project will make already in East Africa. So let's, at the lab, use this East Africa as a pilot and come out of the lab with implementation of this concept for East Africa. Then, as he said, we emulate to other RECs and to the whole continent. It is just SATAM implementation. But this is the way we want to find solution, as the Malaysian indicated, at free feet. The high level have been there, SATAM has been decided, the free trade area have been decided. Why they are not moving? Let's come with this type of project and let's make it happen. We took a lot of time. We were given a 1 hour slot. I know you are following just this single example of what we want to do in the lab. We do have many. We have identified already 8 projects for the lab, and this is one of them. And I'm confident by implementing them, we'll be able to do. If I can go just to my last slide, and then we will conclude because the time it took, yeah. So we just have an appeal. We need all stakeholders here who have stake that we should leave that marginalization and come to growing and get these figures like 10, 15% of our market share on intra-Africa first, and then global share also going up to that type of level. We need your contribution to fund the Hotel California. So when we lock in people, we want to lock them in not for 8 weeks, we want to lock them for 5 days. Because as you can see through this example, we have done already the exercise, part of the exercise outside the lab. So when we go there, we are just putting the people back on the wall to make sure we don't go out without implementation. So that's the appeal I would like to make. To conclude with my panel here, we could have gone through each panelist with different example of project, but to save time for the other session, we will say thank you to the panel, and thank you to you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Konate, and to the esteemed panel. Before you go down, we have our token of appreciations for you. Thank you so much. We will not hold a Q&A session for this particular panel, but please, any questions you may have about what was discussed, please do look for them and reach them during the course of the conference. All right, thank you.